I am excited to invite you to two events. The first is a free Zoom masterclass on healing from grief and loss with Earth as guide, August 17th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Email desert.star@quantumjourneygo.com for your free Zoom link. Secondly, I'll be holding a 2-day-only retreat entitled Weave a New Destiny, October 2nd and 3rd from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We will work with Earth to identify what's holding us back, things we need to let go, and the steps to take toward a new destiny. To register, go to www.quantumjourneygo.com.
Welcome, everybody, to the Mystical Mermaid Lounge. Today, we have, of course, my lovely co-host, Chione, with us.
Hello.
And our honorary mermaid, Willow Lake. We are so excited to bring you to our audience today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Willow Lake is a radiant and mystical spirit whose heart is, in our opinion, just as vast as the ocean. She is a proud veteran who has turned mystic, much like her sister mermaid, if I may say so myself. She carries both strength and softness in a beautiful balance. She's a devoted mother, a grandmother, and she lives her life with honor, intuition, an open hand, and is always ready to support anyone in need, including animals. Willow walks in both magic and grounded wisdom. She's an active member in a beloved coven and a caretaker to some pretty adorable goats and some chickens. She's a woman whose gentle strength has touched all of us who know her. From the moment she stepped into our world, we instantly recognized the kindred soul and named her our honorary mermaid, a woman whose presence brings warmth, grace, and enchantment to every space that she enters. Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited you're finally here. So today we are going to talk about mermaids, the culture, the mythos, what it means to us, how we each internalize that, because every day we all greet each other with good mermaid. So I think we've embraced that. And I just thought this would be a really good opportunity to share why that means so much to us and what it looks like to each of us. Looking back in history, mermaids have been a part of our mythos and handed down in literature for over 3,000 years. Going back to the early Mesopotamian influence, and the earliest known tales are traced back to ancient Syria around 1000 BC. African and Caribbean cultures also have included water deities. The Celtic have the selkie stories, or some call them selkie, which is a mythological creature from Scottish, Irish, and Norse folklore that can shapeshift between seal and human form. However, the mermaids that we believe in today are most closely described from ancient Greece. So I really kind of wanted to break it open here and see what each of you thought about this, or why it was important to approach cultural stories, not only with respect, but to remember them and to talk about them.
Willow, you and I have talked in the past about the Syrian goddess Atargatis and how that story really spoke to you. What was it that resonated so deeply with her story?
When you're talking about the origins from Syria, it's the whole tragic love affair, that she became a goddess, moon fertility, feminine power. It's still all feminine, ocean, moon, water, the waves, the whole duality, the connectedness of it all. I find fascinating that it all comes back to the same basics. I like the whole mermaid concept anyway. The only thing I didn't like when I was looking into some of the mythologies and traditions, and it didn't surprise me, mermaids were looked upon as bad omens or soulless, or they were luring men to their deaths, or they were just out looking to steal men away, which I thought was funny because that goes back to the patriarchy thing.
Yep.
Why were mermaids the bad thing?
That arc, right? The arc of the full circle of, even in Christianity, where we see that females did have an integral role in helping bring the spirit to people and to explain that message. And somewhere along the line, King James and some others, we were edited out. And there were so many editors, but he was just one. Regardless, we were either edited out or turned into a nefarious concept that even from the origin story of Eve being the one who chose the apple, being the one who then has to suffer during childbirth. And so I'm just going to digress for one moment, but I saw this post on, I think it was Facebook or Insta, where someone said that if we believe the origin story and Eve choosing the apple from the tree and thereby sin was spread through the world, her knowledge was the cause of this sin, and then she had childbirth pain and blah, 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 then what does that mean for my cat when she gives birth? Is she also touched by Eve's sin, her original sin? Or an elephant or a giraffe? They have no religion but nature, but instinct, right? We presume. And so this story that we think about from a Christian standpoint, to your point, Willow, is we're coming right back to where someone who had terrible heartache and then becomes mythologized into beautiful energy ends up being a negative energy, if not almost demonic in many cases. I often get mermaids and that siren calling where they lure people to the shores and the ships crash against the cliffs. And this whole thing becomes this convoluted mess of female energy that essentially ends badly for everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. I think, especially with history in the Navy and being on a boat in the middle of the ocean 20 plus years later, and here we're talking about how were the mermaids and the sirens intertwined? And going back when I was doing my research, it felt like they were two separate mythos, but it feels to me that as the world continued to discover new territories and continued to go on further excursions on these boats, who were mostly men, they missed the woman presence and the woman touch. And so they combined these into this, what we now would call very patriarchal thinking, and took over this mythology. And to kind of tie in with exactly what Chione and Willow are saying, to me, encompasses all of the beauty and natural energy that the feminine brings. It doesn't mean you have to be female. It means the feminine provides these elements. And I see it as like sparkly fairy dust. And they just couldn't compete. So they had to create this nasty version of the siren. So it's interesting. We all came up with very similar thoughts and conclusions on that.
With the mermaids, you always seem to have two different sides of it. You have the children's version of mermaids, the Little Mermaid, and it's all sparkly and pretty and
sterilized.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it, sterilized. And then you have the adult version. Do you guys remember Patrick Duffy, the man from Atlantis from 77? That's the first thing that came to my mind at one point. It was a TV show, bad TV show, like an Aquaman, mermaid, merman. There's always been two worlds to it.
I was going to say the same, Willow, just to branch off of that, get that Willow branch. I thought the same thing. And then you took the words right out of my gills. I'm going to digress for 1 second. This is something else that drives me crazy. It's better now than it's ever been. And I can only speak for the last, I've been alive for 50 some years. So I don't know what these things looked like in the past. But as soon as a woman becomes pregnant, they are infantilized. We put them in big things with big bows, and we look like little beach balls, and we have no shape, and we're wearing things that don't look a thing like someone who just had an intimate moment with someone presumably they love or they wanted to have an intimate moment with. When I became pregnant, I went to a maternity store. I said, "You've got to be kidding me. This is the most ridiculous looking outfits I've ever seen in my life. If I'm not going to wear them, minus the shape, but if I'm not going to wear this style when I'm not pregnant, why would you make me look like the little Dutch girl on the front of a paint can?" That's what seems to happen, almost like we can't think about women in a sensuous or non-promiscuous way. We're not allowed to be sensuous. We're not allowed to be seen as sexual creatures or beings without it either being sterilized or without it becoming infantile. And I felt the same way about the mermaid. Now, I completely understand that some of the mermaid's history is quite dark and children wouldn't understand that. But to make her seem like someone so far from the really deep energy that the mythology comes from just seemed like we were doing that old thing again, where we strip the power of the feminine divine right out from the story.
What is the goal of the mermaid in the sterilized version? Her whole goal is to become human so she can have the man.
Good point.
She's willing to give up everything.
I love that you said that. And I love that this truly is one of my all-time favorite movies, the Little Mermaid that we're talking about. Because now that you say that, I feel like I just had all these light bulbs go off. I'm not saying that TV is responsible to teach me morals and history, not by any standards.
In theory, yes, it's great that you're willing to give something up for love.
But a partnership, maybe, not sacrificial.
Yes.
It's
There's a difference.
It's the savior, which is what religion has made out of men. It's what rom-coms are based on. And yeah, I love a good rom-com, when in the feels, but at the end of the day, it's always about finding love with the perfect man, and he ends up lifting us up, either out of the trash, out of poverty, or just out of being a bridesmaid all the time.
Well, that's
Christmas Hallmark movie.
I was just going to say, we're going to have to create our own TV channel and start making our own movies, because I'll tell you, I am a Hallmark Christmas rom-com freak. It is an embarrassing secret of mine.
We have to make it Mermark. My sister, who is the least touchy-feely, smoochy, smushy individual, she's like Howard Stern as far as feelings go. And she loves Hallmark. And there's that one movie, or it's a series based in Canada, where people have horses and all this family and there's love. I'm stunned. The people that are drawn in by those stories, but who doesn't want a feel-good story, right? And I read something, I don't know if this still holds true because this has been a little while, but I'd love to hear your take on this. I read something that said out of all and I'm sure it was a really scientific cosmopolitan study I read in Cosmo, but it said something like, of all the men and women surveyed, women are less believing of the traditional two people fall in love, the man helps the woman in all the ways, and they go off living happily ever after. Women are like, no, the men are more drawn into that story. Now, this was a Cosmo survey, I'm pretty sure, or something on that level. But at the end of the day, it's a nice story. And that's sadly what we've done with many of the dark stories that have real feeling behind them.
I was a little surprised with how far back mermaids had been documented in history, whether it was through art, hieroglyphics. They've just been all over the world. So I thought that was really cool to start off with. We've been talking about the spiritual meaning of the mermaid and how it ties into not only ourselves, but with culture. So one of the things I wanted to discuss, Carl Jung's idea of water as the unconscious and Campbell's concept of thresholds for transformation. Carl Jung, in The Archetypes and Collective Unconsciousness, Volume 9, Part 1, he wrote The Structures of Unconsciousness in 1916, which was about archetypes and these universal symbols that live in our collective unconscious. He associated water with our emotions and our intuitive depths. And a mermaid can be seen as something rising from the inner ocean into awareness. So then tying that in a little bit with what Joseph Campbell says, when he talks about thresholds in A Hero with 1,000 Faces, he talks about moments when that transformation happens, which I would equate to the mermaid living right at the boundary between the worlds. This idea resonated for living at the threshold because we do interact every single day as responsible adult people in this mundane world, but we also have a very active, mystical world that we also are very much a part of. How this idea of living on the threshold, how that interprets to being a mermaid for you in your very busy everyday life.
I like the bridge. I like the bridge better. When you say the threshold, you cross over the threshold. The threshold sounds too permanent.
That feeling of crossing over into a threshold doesn't make me feel confined or contained or permanent. But maybe, Willow, you're looking at it like how the bride is carried over a threshold. Her life,
I never would have given that a thought.
it's that old life is over. And is it ever over? Of course not. We continue on as the humans that we are into a new role, but not over. So when you said that threshold piece made you feel like, oh no, now you're kind of being stuck in something permanent, I get that. Hello, listeners. Just a quick second to introduce the www.inneralchemyforyou.com website by my co-host on the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast, Chloe Brown. She offers some amazing workbooks on shadow work, as well as some mystical offerings for those of you who are into a little bit of magic.
I never looked at it that way. But now that you mention it like that, I think that's the way I did interpret it. The bridge felt more of a flow back and forth between the two worlds, so to speak.
Right, because
Love
bridges connect the two, and you can go over them both. And even if you straddle, it's like when I was a kid, I'd stand between the Maryland and the Pennsylvania state line. Look, I'm in two states at one time. You know, you could do that on a bridge. But what I will say is that ability to hover, not just on one side or the other, but both, How cool is that? And that's what the mermaid is able to do. And that's why when I do animal spirit readings, if I see frog, toad, tadpole, lizard, something that is able to go in water and also live on land, I think they're the most magical creatures. Where, to your point, Willow, crossing over a threshold is life-changing.
When you were talking about the bridge and how it felt more comforting and inviting, I think of a beautiful rainbow. And so I wonder if symbolically throughout our lives, if that's why we see the bridge as more of a comfort zone.
Because you can always go back. I went to this side. Yeah, I'm not feeling Niagara on the Canadian side today. I'll head it back over here. It's not fixed. It's not permanent. You can travel between the two, which I get why Willow's saying a threshold almost feels like, nope, once you've crossed over it, you can step back out, but there's a feeling of, I'm now forever changed.
Yeah.
Once I've crossed that threshold.
Yeah. If I was a mermaid, I don't know if I'd give up my tail. I don't think I'd want to. And to cross that threshold, to me, that would be like giving up your tail.
What does that mean to you, Willow, to give up your tail?
It'd be like cutting off part of yourself for someone else. And I mean, yes, we all, at some point in our lives, you're always sacrificing something for somebody else, for your children, something. That's just the way life is. But you don't literally cut yourself in half. You don't wipe yourself out for somebody else. Are you getting that much in return?
What did you give up to come live on this land with humans?
Yeah.
What is that statistic? They say there are two beings on the earth that are absolutely ruthless as far as killing. They will kill for reasons outside of hunger. And one is the polar bear, because they have no defense. They don't hibernate. They're out on the ice, and it's get killed or kill. And the other is human. Why would you want to leave the ocean where you would like to think everybody's got an equal shot at something to then cross into a place where it's hard? I would think you get a lot quicker swimming than walking, at least in my speed. At this point, my swimming's not any better, but you're talking about true sacrifice.
Yeah, that's a big sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're all making so many, what's the statistic? Like thousands of decisions, I think it is, a day. I think along with those choices and decisions that we make, like Elise Wells always says, all we have is time and energy. Those are our resources. And so now that I look at things more in that perspective, I think about the cost of said sacrifice. I'm willing to compromise, but I'm not willing to be the cost. I couldn't imagine foregoing my tail to have legs. It feels like the ultimate sacrifice. You're literally giving all of who you are, your essence. I hadn't thought of it that deep. You're good, Chione. You're good. But also the duality, right? And the flow. Because as humans, when we find our sweet spot where we're listening to what our body needs, we're feeding our body what it needs, we're taking care of our mental brain, we're taking care of our energy levels, we're protecting all of the things, we're doing all the things. And a lot of people would call that like a flow moment, which I find kind of interesting because to me that ties right in with the mermaid. And then duality, right? We talk about this all the time in everything. And my husband yesterday sent me this little meme, which I never really share with anybody, but it was so quality that I sent it to Chione. And it says, a good person is not harmless. A good person is a dangerous person who has their monsters under voluntary control. And then it references it as the shadow law. If you suppress your dark side, it will control you subconsciously. You do not eliminate your anger. You integrate it so that you can use it as fuel when necessary. And sometimes we really do need to integrate the inner beast, and sometimes we really don't. As a shadow work life coach, it made me start thinking, how is this connected to the mermaid? They're one and the same because it encompasses a little of each of the worlds. And if we want to label one as good, we could. If we want to label one as bad, we could. But where does that get us? And how does that serve us? And I know for me, I can use that little piece of advice for myself often throughout the day. So I felt like this was just all really tied into the spiritual meaning of being a mermaid. And we've talked about embodying the mermaid a little bit already. Being a mermaid is learning to live deeply in my inner world while still fully participating in my human life and experience, right? It's not about escaping the mundane. It's affording me the opportunity to bring depth to my mundane. This is the duality. And while using my intuition and maintaining a code of ethics on either side of the bridge or the threshold or whatever we want to call it in our own personal lives, right? So I find ways and time to notice the magical in the mundane so that I don't get stuck in our current political tense energies. So I wanted to talk to both Willow and Chione and see how you embody the spirit of the mermaid in today's modern climate.
There's a lighter side to the mermaid. There's the sparkle factor. There is something very joyous and bright, playful about the mermaid. Shadow work or journaling or creativity. And my recent endeavor lately has been through some shamanic art practice, which I have been loving doing. It helps in this time to let some of the frustration go on paper with color, and it helps you let it out in a more creative, more colorful way without it affecting other people or yourself in a negative way. A shout out to Lady Emberstorm, who is doing shamanic art classes. Her classes are fabulous. I highly recommend them, especially when you're frustrated or upset. And she has some techniques, actual art projects, art therapies that she also teaches, neurotherapeutic art practices, where she adds her own spin on them. And she also adds her spin on bright colors and rainbows. And to me, that's very mermaid-like. It doesn't mean you're ignoring your problems, but you can put it out on paper. It does help. It lives there instead of stuck inside of you. So it's that side of the mermaid that is depth and emotional that you don't always see.
And I'd love to ask you a question about that, Willow, because you mentioned several times the colors. What do the colors mean to you?
It depends on the situation. Sometimes they can just be very joyous, very happy, very bright. For example, last weekend, though, when I was sick and very frustrated, the colors were very dull and muted and not very pretty, very muddy. You can use the colors to let out your emotions, but sometimes it even helps if you are feeling down to purposely use brighter, more vibrant colors because it will lift up your mood, or purposely do something very mermaid-like. There's a lot of symbolism and a lot of meaning to individual colors. If you research colors, a lot of people say green is abundance. Some people say blue is protection, or yellow is joy.
Yeah, they definitely evoke
Yes.
emotions. And I often wonder about people who have some level of color blindness, about the way they receive information on emotion through color has to be adapted in some way.
But is it? Because if everything is energy, just because they can't visually see it, and according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, we all see colors differently anyways. So perhaps it's deeper than that. Perhaps it's an energy that we're all picking up, and we're trained to identify that color as blue, or the ship in the horizon.
It also could be your connection to that color. I mean, you may have a favorite color, and that particular color brings you joy, but it may not bring Chloe joy.
I think for me, embodying a mermaid energy means to honor fluidity, intuition, being able to navigate different terrain with some level of grace, and to be able to look at the world and see the magic and the love that already exists therein.
Be grateful.
Mm-hmm. And avoid worms hanging on hooks. I avoid them on the daily, so I don't know about y'all.
That is so funny. I don't know. My chicken really likes those wormies, minus the hooks. But I think for me, part of the whole mermaid concept also brings this element of mystery, and I don't know, I can't stop saying whimsical. I don't know why I keep saying that, but it's very flowy, and the duality and all these things that are so important in my life. But I also believe there's this element when we're all little and we're presumably celebrating a holiday. Let's use Christmas for an example. And you just can't wait to wake up for Christmas morning. That energy is so palpable, whimsical, because you just don't know what's coming around the corner, but you just can feel all the goodness and the excitement and gratitude and eagerness. And to me, it's that moment of energy is kind of how I feel about embodying that mermaid, the mermaid spirit. How grateful I am to be in not just the mundane world all day, every day anymore, because that for me was killing me mentally. So to find a way to see my everyday life through this, not rose-colored glasses, because I don't want to be delusional, but to see the sparkle and the glitter inside of sometimes a really mucky situation. So I'm really grateful we had an opportunity to talk about all of these things. I do want to remind everybody, anything we've referenced or discussed, including Miss Ember, will be in our show notes. And in closing, Willow, did you have any final words or mantra or anything you wanted to share with our listeners today?
These are 2 quotes that I found. I don't know who wrote them. This one I thought was just funny. Mermaids don't lose sleep over the opinions of shrimp.
We need to
Awesome.
make that a sticker. I am here for that.
Me too.
And then this other one I thought was great. And it's like the ocean, I am powerful, mysterious, and ever-changing. And to trust your intuition and be creative like a mermaid.
I love it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you guys.
It was so awesome having all my mermaids in one conversation, and Chione for being here. Thank you both for being so vulnerable and so honest. There were some hard questions here that I threw at you guys last minute and didn't warn you. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.